All right, thanks for coming out. What I wanted to cover tonight, how many people are here in 415, the new course, or from 660? If you're from 660, say 660. I think there's a mix. Yeah, so we got a mix of people from, yeah, Lauren, Megan, okay. And then we've got some new folks. Okay, so, I mean, what I chose to talk about tonight is relevant to everybody and relevant to anybody, really, actually. And that's why I chose to do it. The context here is the fact that I had a meeting actually today um, about um, the um, about some work in climate and wildfire, like climate impacts, droughts, fires, and stuff like this in Canada. And I was dealing with some folks who are really technically specialized in in analytics and so forth, like using you know software algorithms for detecting patterns and so forth. And when we got into discussions about other issues, so other broader policy issues, I mean, some of their positions on it were, you know, I wouldn't say simplistic, but one-dimensional, because they spent most of their time working on the technical aspects of software and so forth. And I think that what I concluded was, I said, wow, these folks really know a lot about this stuff, but man, they do not know about all these other very important aspects of sustainable development. So that's one thing that really kind of said, gosh, I mean, a bit of homework there might do people some good. And the other thing I get a lot of is I deal a lot in business and finance, and within those crowds, I get a lot of people who have very strong opinions, either pro or against, uh, climate issues, like whether we should act or whether we shouldn't, or whether taxation is a good idea or not a good idea, and blah blah blah. Like just goes on and on. And usually, obviously, it's the finance folks. Some of them, and a lot of them, are, you know, saying that climate models are wrong, right? And whereas they don't really have the juice to really talk about it. So, what is very important to me is, and what I'd like to outline tonight, and this is useful for those that are in 660 who are kind of moving on to other things, and those in 415 who are just getting it going in environmental management tools, is to like highlight why it's important to look in different areas. Like, what does scholarship in different areas really contribute to your position on these issues? And that's the mission of tonight. So I mean, I don't know about you, but there's often people that make proclamations about the environment or sustainable development. They are basing their position on weak ground. It happens on both fronts. That are those that are green, like those are like pro-green stuff, and those that are anti-green, or those that are, you know, in favor of unfettered development. So have you ever been in that circumstance where you've, I don't know, been at a party or in a meeting where people are making these kind of strong statements about stuff with an incredible amount of confidence, yet at the same time, you know, they seem to have pretty weak foundation in what the issue is all about? Have you ever experienced that? Yes? No? I hope you have, because it happens to me frequently. Like, it happens a lot. Yeah. Again, mostly it happens to me in finance, like when I deal with finance organizations, but it's getting better. So, and today what I have found is many people say, you know, why study? You know, why go to university? It's a waste of time. I don't know if you've seen that, but I see that more and more, actually, like more in social media, and these people trying to sell courses in social media from, in, you name it, whatever it is, social media marketing or business and stuff like that. Saying that's a waste of time, you know, like you can make money doing other things, like being a YouTube star or whatever. And that is true. So, I mean, that is true that studying scholarship in university is not necessarily the most direct way to making cash or making money. I'll agree with that point. However, um, I mean, so the question is, well, why study the environment? Um, Well, if you want to have an informed position about these issues, you need to have the background. Like that's kind of an essential point, right? And so in order to do that, you need to study a bunch of different stuff. And frankly, it takes a long time to really get up to speed in the different areas at sufficient level of depth. So the question is then, what do you need to study and why do you need to study it, right? So what is the role of research and scholarship in the environmental field? And this is just my take, but I'm going to give you a breakdown. So first and foremost, scholarship in the environmental field. This has evolved dramatically over the last 20 years, more than that, but specifically in the last 20 years. When I first started in university, which was in, when was it? 93, 92. Yeah, 92 or 93, somewhere around there. That whole discipline of environment was, I don't know, poorly formulated. It's like more around environmental studies. So philosophy, politics, environmentalism, really. Whereas environmental science and all the different dimensions of what we're kind of going to go over tonight were really not quite there. Like so scholarship was really about issues and understanding issues, some philosophical issues and stuff. But over the past 20 years, it's really evolved dramatically. So you now have the opportunity to go in very high level of depth now on a variety of different areas. Almost there's so much out there now. I wouldn't want to be a student like starting off because there's so many different directions you can go in, right? I mean, I don't know if you feel that way, but if I were starting out right now in undergraduate, I'd be like, oh my God, I don't know what to study because there's so many different things approaches that I can take or look into because there's so much concern around it. So like even in economics, you can spend all your time there or all your time in ecology or biology, what have you. So it's really evolved a lot. And also today you're getting a lot of specialized education and knowledge in areas such as um, uh, climate finance, for instance. That's one area where you can really specialize in. Um, so uh, that has been a huge thing. There's been a lot of development in what we study, and you can see it in the amount of publications and research. Like the amount of publications and journals that have popped up in sustainability has gone up hugely, dramatically. So the field is like there's an awash of different things you can look at. But what I want to point out though is what are the key things you really need to know and are good to know and why. So we break it up first into the natural sciences, right? So in my opinion, the natural sciences are really, a really fundamental part of things you need to know when working in the environmental space. Like you really ideally should have a decent grounding in the environmental sciences. So specifically in ecology, right? So has anybody ever studied ecology before? Have you taken courses in ecology? Yes, good. So ecology, now I hadn't done much ecology when I first started out, but I'll tell you first and foremost, this is an important discipline to be up to speed in. And I'll give you an example, like even where there's crossover. So I'm going to give you some web links as we go through and just throw things at you, right? So one thing to really to know about ecology for is this, like REDD, if we're interested in climate stuff. So are you familiar with REDD, R-E-D-D? I think I may have talked about it in a previous podcast. Anybody? Right. So REDD, for those that don't know about it, is reduced emissions from ecosystem degradation and deforestation, which is conserving rainforest and paying people to conserve it through the carbon value that is stored in the rainforest, okay? Creating an economic incentive. Now, when I started with this work in REDD actually in 2006, I was put into meetings with big shot lawyers and big shot finance folks, and knew about ecology. Like I was the only one who, just with them, having done some grad work in ecology in undergrad, like I wasn't like a 30-year veteran ecologist, and I was able to really discuss and explain to them the fundamental importance of understanding ecosystem ecology and the dynamics of ecosystems, particularly related to carbon storage, because that's what this is about. And the interplay of water and ecosystem function, that's a huge part of RED to ensure that's proper water, hydrological parameters in place. And, it, and the amount of importance on the finance part of that, that's what really drove a lot of interest in that. It wasn't about ecosystem function, it's largely about, what kind of finance we can pull up from these projects or how financially important they are. So a solid base in ecology is really important for understanding that, climate adaptation, understanding invasive alien species issues, biodiversity issues, obviously, functional aspects of ecosystem services. You need to have a good foundation in ecology to really know how that stuff works, and then therefore relate it to the policy. So ecology is, it's you got to know it, and you got to keep on knowing it. It's not an end game. Another one, atmospheric science, right? Atmospheric science. Why do you need to understand atmospheric science? And I'll explain to you the importance of this. So those that are in the undergrad working on environmental management, if you know atmospheric science, you have a pretty good idea of the constituents of the atmosphere, how things work, how fronts work, how climate change works, it actually really works, and then also related issues like air quality, particulate matter, and so forth and so on. So, and then when you're called upon to actually comment on or work on a specific issue like this, when you have to dig into anything related to climate and look at IPCC reports, go to that website and look at various reports, you'll have a baseline understanding of what things are all about, how things actually work. So particularly if you look at the first assessment report. So if you look in that, if you go to reports, and then you go to sixth assessment report, the physical basis. Here we go. I'm just going to pull up one of these and send this through. In order to really understand this, which is a fundamental report here, to look at that, you need to have a background in atmospheric science, to really understand that, look at all the graphs and so forth. That's the base of it, really. So if you're ever called into a situation where you need to kind of testify, sit in a meeting, be the environmental expert, and it's with a bunch of companies or policymakers that are discussing, or municipal government people, or whatever it is, anybody who's trying to make a decision, and they start to talk about kind of the impacts on climate and so forth. For one, you should know what climate is, by definition, versus weather. What is the difference between weather and climate, right? Weather is your day-to-day meteorological parameters, whereas climate is a 30-year mean. It's a longer-term climate parameter, parameter of longer-term parameters, right? A lot of people don't even know that basic piece of knowledge, and that is what you get from having a baseline knowledge of atmospheric science. Geomorphology and soils. So I used to think that this was, not really that important, right? Geomorphology and soils. Whereas, in order to deal with anything related to contaminated sites or any kind of that kind of impact assessment, you need to know what the constituents of soil is. You need to know what, what is soil? How is it constructed? So for instance, I'm going to push you through something here. Here is something from the World Bank on site remediation, urban regeneration from the World Bank, environmental impact assessment and site remediation planning, right? They give you the remediation options, planning, and so forth, and you can go through all the different program stuff there. The key is, if you have no idea exactly what soil is, and geomorphology is a longer-term process, and also when you start to deal with climate stuff and look at soil organic carbon, that's a big issue with climate work, you don't have the base. You do not understand that there is an organic component to soil and an inorganic component to soil. You don't understand that there is porosity issues. There's interplay with how hydrology works with soil structure and all that kind of stuff. So a knowledge in and ongoing knowledge in geomorphology and soils is really fundamentally important, right? What about environmental chemistry? Another part of the suite of things in natural science you need to know. Environmental chemistry. So again, we've talked in previous podcasts about POPs, persistent organic pollutants, and air pollution and so forth. Like, having a solid background in environmental chemistry will cause you to, will give you the foundation to understand about volatilization, like why things are volatile or not, right? And what impact that will have. Like, say, if you spill gasoline on a sunny day on cement outside, you actually don't need to worry about it too much, right? Why? Because it volatilizes. It'll turn into smaller chain hydrocarbons and volatilize off and won't be such a big deal. Unless, of course, it's like poured directly on someone or what have you. Another important aspects of environmental chemistry, like an example of something that that you need to that you'll need to know, or that will help you understand, is bioavailability. So bioavailability and how how things can be bioavailable or not. So here we go. As I'm going to send a link through I'm just throwing some links through articles and so forth. This is just going to send you through another one here. Here we go. So this resource here, you look at it. It's a book on bioavailability, environmental risk assessment. So bioavailability basically means whether or not something can be uptaken by a human, by a species, a human or otherwise, right? So metals, right? Like metals often are not bioavailable because they don't have a way of getting into a human being or an animal, whereas sometimes they do. But if it's methylated, like methyl mercury, for instance, it becomes very bioavailable because it can get into cells, right, due to the nature of how that chemistry works. But if you don't have the environmental chemistry background, it's hard to kind of understand those processes, like the process of methylation, whether something is, mobile or not, and so forth and so on. So environmental chemistry is like one of those big pieces of knowledge that is important to know. It's important for you to study that. I'm going to send through a link to a resource. There we go. This is the book. So if you want to get a book on environmental chemistry, this is the one to get. I'm just going to send through right now. Here, man's book. Has anybody ever read this book or seen this book before, or used this book in a course? Yes, no? Manahan? Anybody ever heard of this book? Manahan? No? Good. You attending this podcast is worth it based just on this. This book is the best book out there on environmental chemistry. It's easy to read. It's highly relevant. It gives you the whole scope of environmental chemistry. If you work in any kind of like site assessment or anything like that, you have to have this on your bookshelf. Like, it's a must-have. This was the book that we used in Royal Roads way back when I was doing my undergrad. So big one. But this gives you that foundation knowledge. Whenever I have any kind of question about environmental chemistry, boom, I go back to that one. Okay? So environmental chemistry, that's a hugely important body of knowledge to know about. Toxicology, site assessment, all that kind of stuff. Hydrology. So hydrology, fundamental. Why do we need to know about hydrology? Why do you think we need to know about hydrology? We get hired by some group. Why is it important? I'll show you right now. It's happening a lot. Brown and 9 is like you. So far, as far all the customers you mentioned, offsite contaminated water. Yes, water is essential, but not only that. Like hydrology is one of the most important things. Um, Hydrology wraps well with chemistry for sure. So hydrology and chemistry go closely together because hydrology will allow you to understand the mobility. So fluids and hydrology, not hydrogeology. Okay. Well, both. I mean, both are important. Usually, I just say hydrology because of you know, it's a kind of a catch-all, really. But you got to know hydrology because energy and water, that's how nature works. Like it's driving the process, driving atmospheric processes. When you're dealing with site assessment stuff, the fluids, the fluid mechanics, how contaminants move, essentially important. You got to know it. And then also, as I pointed out here with this link, this is becoming more and more of an issue. Floods, like we work on a lot of this flood risk stuff. So to know how this works, like both drought and flood. So I could look at, say, the lower mainland here and look at, I don't know, here's one of the examples. Floodplains, right? Those are floodplain issues that, you know, you need to understand how that map is made. And then hydrology gives you the juice in order to do that. Like it gives you the parameters, okay? So important, very important knowledge to have. So that frames like the natural sciences. But even if you knew all that stuff, you know, you can be at a situation where you're at a loss, right? So social and human sciences. Environmental law. Has anybody ever taken environmental law? Yes, good. Why is it important? It's important because these are the rules. These are the rules that will guide impact assessments. They will guide what we do with climate change. They will guide how we conduct ourselves, right? It's very, very, very important to understand the role that law has with policy, within governance, et cetera, et cetera. Here's a good example, West Coast Environmental Law Group, okay? So these issues are, this is a good example of a group that's squarely addressing that. So these folks are lawyers that work on campaigns and advocacy related to environmental law. But to understand, I think even to understand the basics forms of government and how laws work in different jurisdictions, both provincially in Canada, federally, as well as internationally, it's really a key piece of the puzzle. So if you don't understand that, you don't understand how these kind of regulatory frameworks are implemented and why people are doing the things that they do for permitting and so forth. So environmental law, essential part of it, but not the only piece of the puzzle. Sociology, right? Has anybody ever heard of nudge theory? Yes, no? Nudge? Probably not. There you go. Check that out. So sociology, the study of society and how we organize ourselves and what kind of drives social phenomenon work. Well, a good example of this is, because I mean, a lot of what we do is understanding how society kind of reacts or relates to the environment, impacts the environment, and how the environment impacts society. So sociology is a big part of that. And I'm using this as an example in nudge theory, which is usually, you know, I mean, maybe it would be fitting more in behavioral economics or political theory, but behavioral sciences as well, so sociology is there. And nudge theory talks about how how people can be influenced with policy, right? How people can be nudged, right? So this is a really important part of formulating policy now, is how we can encourage people to go about doing certain things, right? So how we can go about having people become recycle, for instance, or not recycle, or behave in a more sustainable way. But it's the study of sociology, the study of behavior, that allows us to be able to do that. Economics, right? So what's the role of economic knowledge? Well, it's pretty significant. So this group here is another group that I recommend you take a look at. In Canada, they're called the Eco-Fiscal Commission. These folks here, ecofiscal.ca. So these folks take economic knowledge, they're mostly economists or finance people, and try and determine tools or policies or so forth that can be used to make a more sustainable approach, right? So Eco-Fiscal Commission, for instance, they help us craft climate policy based on sound economics. So if you want to know whether or not a carbon tax is a good idea or not, obviously having some knowledge of economics is a good idea. So these folks have done pretty good analysis of various types of market signals and policies and so forth to help us really understand what makes the most sense. And I mean, of anything, I think this is where environmental people fall down, is they don't know enough about the economics of situations. And I've seen firsthand examples of policies that look good on the surface, but economically just are not good in the long run, like certain kind of carbon pricing strategies, even cap and trade policy versus a carbon tax economically is not that great of an idea. Like a carbon tax makes far more economic sense than cap and trade does. But you only really get at that fine level analysis when you really have sound economists or economic knowledge put to work. An example of that is the Eco-Fiscal Commission. Okay, but economics are a really important part of the mix. Psychology. Okay, why is psychology important? Well, I've already talked about behavioral economics, but one really interesting area of psychology that I just recently got on, and I'm going to send you a link here, paradigm, environment. I'm just trying to get this link, is how people react to things. So I'm trying to find this link. Okay, here we go. So, okay, this is a great example. Here. So look at this link here, this paper. This is a kind of a rather unique example, but determining the socio-demographic, psychographic, and religiosity of green hotel consumer in Malaysia. Okay, kind of an out there study, but why I wanted to chose this is psychology. So psychographic and religiosity. So the psychographic paradigm is how people perceive stuff. Like how do different people demographically through their psyche think certain things. And I didn't really know much about this until 2 years ago when I was working with people who work in this area, psychographics. And what it is you are able to create a graph, literally, of how people react to certain issues based on, and it's influenced by a lot of different things. So you can sample a lot of different people, like do surveys of men, women, people of different ages, like different age generation, different cultures, and so forth, and then graph that and see what their survey responses, how their survey responses to certain issues relate to these kind of parameters that influence their perspective. Okay, so if you do psychographic analysis, it's shocking what you see is you can see there's trends based on certain demographies or characteristics of people, like, for instance, men versus women. If you look at psychographic examples of analysis or psychographic analysis done on populations on environmental issues, you see pretty clear trends, right? So men on the whole tend to be more risk taking, whereas women tend to be more risk averse at the psychographic level. So, and then the reactions to certain policies, there is a greater tendency for women to embrace the precautionary principle. And as you're probably aware, the precautionary principle is the principle in like environmental thinking or policy of maybe we shouldn't try that. Maybe we should be cautious about something or other before we go about doing it, right? Be precautious. And so therefore there's a big risk averseness. And if you look at the data, the studies that have been done, there's certain things that pop as a result. And you really only get that with good understanding of psychology and the psychographic analysis. Same with demographics, you know, like there's certain demographics of people that really are kind of, you know, even in their reaction to like climate policy, they're far more conservative than a younger demographic, right? All of that is in demography and psychology, for lack of a better term. So important piece of the puzzle, far more important than I thought. And then one last kind of dimension of social and natural sciences, which I think doesn't really get enough airtime these days, is philosophy, right? So philosophy, what does this have to do with you know, environment-related stuff? Well, it actually is really fundamentally important. So I would say, you know, the fundamental questions that we ask ourselves in the environment about, like, say, consumption, for instance, and how we choose to live and policy decisions and so forth, at a fundamental level really comes back to philosophy. Like, what is the worldview we have? Do we see the world as this like kind of giant repository of resources that we can use indefinitely without any regard for the long-term consequences or the health of the planet, right? I mean, that's a philosophical question at the end of the day. And, you know, what your kind of lens that you look through, and we used to call these the expansionist worldview and the conservationist worldview. Those are the two kind of dichotomies back when I first studied this back at UVic in like 94, whatever it was. And those are philosophical schools of thought, right? The expansionist worldview views the world as this ever-expanding economy that we have no concern for, without, you know, regard for the planetary boundaries or these other things. Whereas the conservationist worldview, more of an ecosophy perspective, right? So if you've read anything from Don Muir or Alan Drenksen or Arne Ness or people like this, or even I would say Dixon, sorry, what am I thinking? Walden. Anyway, I'm slipping his name, slipping my mind. That's more of an ecosophy-oriented view of the world. That, you know, this world isn't, we can't deplete it completely, right? So those, I mean, those are schools of thought we need to know about. I mean, even just generally as environmental practitioners. In terms of the applied sciences, you know, engineering for one, right? Do we need to know about engineering? Of course we need to know about engineering, right? It's the fundamental of, say, if we're looking at, you know, how are we going to design all of the things that we need to design to take a more sustainable way of doing things? I'll give you an example of, a good example of a Canadian kind of group, right? Here, we don't know engineering, we don't have this. Canadian Solar. Canadian Solar is one of the biggest biggest solar companies around. They're technically Canadian, although it's Chinese. A lot of it's run from China, but I mean, it's you know, we need to have that in order to do those kind of projects. Engineering, fundamentally important. Business, right? The study of business. How do businesses become green. So in environmental management tools, we spent a lot of time on that stuff, on you know, how do we go about using performance reporting tools and so forth. So I'm going to send a link through to this book, which is again by Peter. Here we go. This is a business thinker that is he's prominent. Like he's a systems thinker that has kind of moved into sustainability. So here, check out this, Peter Senge. So some of you know him from systems theory and stuff like that, but he is heavily moved into sustainability. If you wanted to dive deep into that, this kind of sustainability in business and leadership, Senge's stuff is definitely worth looking at. Okay, but it's important knowledge to know, like how do we green business? Architecture and design, another applied science that is really fundamentally important. So like, for instance, the whole area of green architecture, right? Is an area that, or green, or urban green development. Send a link to, here's a good example, architecture and design. And the urbanism, IBM. So IBM's Green Horizons Interactive Initiative, they do a lot of work with power generation, traffic, water use, and so forth in the urban environment on the data side of things. But again, it's like a whole area, and all of the green architecture and so forth. Medicine, public health, right? Another big area. COVID, right? Must know the interactions between the environment and humanity. If not, we can have our whole economies shut down. And then the last one that I want to touch on, because we're pushing 45, is environmental management, right? Which is an applied science, I would say. And what that allows you, now that those that are finishing this course and the other folks that are, still kind of getting going on this stuff, environmental management allows you to pull this stuff together. You can draw on all these different disciplines to put it into like strategic and organized thinking to help deal with environmental problems. All right? And that is why you study environmental management, is to synthetically be able to defend your position on environmental decisions in an organization, whether it be a business or a government agency or whatever, an NGO even. So, to conclude, why study? Why do it? I've gone through like a breadth of different things that are important from my standpoint in terms of working on this stuff, and other people would attest to it. So why study and keep on doing it? You have to keep on learning this stuff. Well, the easy answer is this: to know what the heck you are talking about. If you don't, you have meetings like I had today, right? The meeting that I had today, although heavily steeped in knowledge in a certain area, some folks weren't aware of the multiple dimensions of a situation where it's not just about greenhouse gas emissions. It's about socioeconomic development as well, right? That's a big part of sustainable development. And if you're working in finance, you don't, maybe you're the guru in finance, but then you walk into a meeting like talking like you know everything about climate finance, and then as what you're saying is just completely and utterly incorrect. It doesn't make any sense. If you don't have any background in planetary boundaries and the role of kind of policy or economic instruments for dealing with various environmental problems, have a bit of knowledge in those areas, whatever you're working in, and then build on it. So there we go. I mean, that's it for tonight. It's kind of more of a survey review of this to get new folks going, and then also reaffirm those that are finishing Environmental Management Tools 600 course that although you know stuff now about environmental management, there's going to be more that you need to learn given the context and given whatever you're tasked with, whether it be from a legal standpoint or a psychographic standpoint. I'm sure that that's not stuff that you had touched on before, because not a lot of people are working on this stuff. So there we go. I mean, equip yourself. And this idea that, going to university or educating yourself in these areas is a waste of time is ridiculous, because even from just a purely financial standpoint or work standpoint, you may have a meeting and then just kind of make statements that are clearly like not well informed, and then have opportunities not present themselves to you. Like, and that is what will happen if it's at least if it's with me in a meeting. Anyway, so there we go. That's it for tonight. Any questions? Shoot. Did I miss anything? Do any of us go into this for the money, really? Yeah. Well, some people do. Okay, good question. No, you don't, but some people do. The agency. Clarify that, the agency. Did I miss the agency? Oh, the sense of agency. Yes. Okay. Yeah. No, okay, well, that's a good point. So here, do any of us go into this for the money? Really? No, I mean, some people do though. Like, I mean, honestly, like some people, it's just, they see it as a growing area and they want to get into it. And investors, and this is an important point, because some people come into this because it's the new hot area. Like, I know venture capitalists that are into this area now because it's the new hot area, and I deal with them. But guess what? What do? They have, oh, well, we're into carbon, blah, 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 whatever. And then they go and get themselves into deals and hire people that don't really know what they're talking about. Like, they don't have the proper background. They hire the wrong team for certain projects, invest in the wrong technology. And, even if they are in it just for money, because of the lack of knowledge in the area, they found themselves in, okay, well, now, like, okay, well down the road in this investment, and we didn't really have the proper baseline knowledge to operate effectively in this space, right? So regardless of whether it's about, like, your belief in sustainability, or your practical need just to, I don't know, have a job, or I don't know, or you're just pure, and there are people that are pure and utterly just are seeking opportunity financially. I don't know, whatever it is in your motivation, it actually doesn't matter. Like, whatever it is, having the knowledge, having to be a specialist at being in, yeah. Well, the other thing is, another point here is, how can you know all this stuff, right? Well, you can't, right? You cannot, but you can know a fair bit of it, and then you can specialize in certain areas, and you can also know what you don't know, and that's important. So when I have to build teams for projects, I'm really good at knowing what I don't know. I know when we need to get a lawyer on a project, or I know when we need to get an economist on a project, or I know when you need to get a specialist in POP, for instance, like one right now we're dealing with. We've got a chemist who's a specialist in POPs. So I know that, I have certain knowledge, but it has its limits in certain areas. So if we have to really look at protocols for precision organic pollutants and managing them, I mean, I need a specialist in that, and I know who to contact. So I did. So that's it. Like, it's you do, like, as you go, you want to kind of definitely build the right team, get the right ones on it, for sure. That's a big part of my job, is to pick the right people. So yeah, those are good points. Very good points. Anybody else? We'll be rolling some more of these out come next week. I'll make them a little more focused on certain issues. I might even try and bring some guests in. I'm open to suggestions. If you have any requests, that's good for topics. And I've got the distribution list going for everybody now. So former students and people in general are welcome to jump on. Anyway, so there we go. That's it. It gives you kind of an overview, some things that are important to know. For all of these, for those that are new, I will post this on YouTube, and then I will also post the notes as a Word doc that's linked to a Dropbox that you can download for your own reference, so you have those as well, if it will be useful to you. All right. Thank you very much for coming out. I hope there was something useful that came up. It was good to see you all. And yeah, feel free to be in touch if you have any questions. For those in 415, we will start moving pretty hard now. Keep everything. And we will get out to work quick. I will put those, your specific parts of the pipeline up now. And those in 660, you're welcome to continue to attend. You're on the list if you want to, like the distribution list. But yeah, we'll keep in touch, and I'm working on your assignments. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for coming out, and we will talk to you very soon.